So let's talk now about the Megalomaniac evil. My name is Brian L. Jackson, and I'm the author of Light Warriors and Chaos. And I want to talk to you today about Megalomaniac villains a little bit and some defining features. Some good examples of Megalomaniac villains. A lot of villains in classic James Bond are of this type. A lot of Bond villains are either terrorists or they're megalomaniacs. And sometimes you get terrorists who are also megalomaniacs. Blofeld was a perfect example of the megalomaniac character. I've been mining Star Wars heavily lately, but I think obviously Palpatine is a megalomaniac. These are characters that will commit evil for the purposes of seeking power as an end in and of itself. In other words, the villain who says they want to take over the world, like Pinky and the Brain. Now, they may have more complex motives for why they want ultimate power, but typically this is a villain that will seek power as an end in and of itself. Sauron could be seen as a megalomaniac, although I think a stronger megalomaniac character in Tolkien's universe would be Morgoth or Melkor. Melkor sought power in it as an end in and of itself. Now, he was also, to some extent, a rebel villain, and I want to talk about that more in a future installment. And I guess to an extent, you could also see him as a moral nihilist, since he was willing to. Although I don't know, because I mean, here's a question, and I don't know. This is somewhat up to the interpretation of the reader, I think, because I don't think Tolkien was particularly explicit one way or the other. When Melkor defied Iluvatar, did he defy Iluvatar because he really believed that defiance was? I guess the question is did he defy him to be knowing that it was wrongful, or did he see it as defiance was his path to freedom from Iluvatar, and viewed it as any moral wrongfulness of doing this, including any evil acts he committed later, were in the pursuit of autonomy? I think it's probably the former, because I think he was less about autonomy and more about parity. In other words, he wanted to be equal with Iluvatar, his sin being pride, similar to a certain other individual that I'm sure plenty of Christians are familiar with. But one could make the argument either way, I think. But the point I'm getting at is I think he was definitely motivated by megalomania and a desire to obtain power as an end of itself. Some other good examples of the megalomaniac villain, good ones, not shit ones. Because, I mean, I guess you could say like Shredder and Krang are examples of this, although Shredder, depending on which iteration, is also an example of an evil for its own sake villain, and I think to some extent you could say that about Krang as well. Depends on which iteration. Actually, a good example, in his case, he seeks power through conquest, but a good example of this type of villain would be Shao Kahn, is he seeks power as an end to itself. I don't think you could say Shao Kahn is evil for the sake of evil. His reasons for becoming a conqueror and for seeking power are not very clearly established. We don't know much about Shao Kahn from the Mortal Kombat Legendarium. We don't know much about Shao Kahn beyond that he's the conqueror, that he seeks power as an end in and of itself. So we don't really know more about why he wants power. But I don't think he is an example of evil for its own sake. He has a very specific agenda. He's not just committing random acts of brutal violence just to commit random acts of brutal violence. And the other thing that's interesting about Khan isn't a... As they flesh the character out more over the series and over some of the other fiction in the Mortal Kombat universe, he's not simply about wanting destruction. He wants to rule, and not over the ash heap. So I think he is more fairly described as a megalomaniacal villain, and as such, I would posit to you that he is seeking power, absent any other information about why he wants power. He seeks power as an end in and of itself. You could probably say the same thing about Shang Tsung, except I think Shang Tsung's motivation in seeking power is to liberate himself from Khan. I mean, I think it's sort of a love-hate relationship between Shang Tsung and Khan, somewhat like Vader and Palpatine. Vader seeks power, and Vader seeks power in part to liberate himself from Palpatine, although I don't really think Vader is a megalomaniac villain, because his real motivation about wanting to do away with Palpatine is more about revenge. I think Vader probably, although he is a Sith, he could be more accurately described as he could also be described as a fallen Jedi, not the same scale of evil as Palpatine, clearly. So, villains that seek power as an end in and of itself are interesting in that you get characters that will be tested as far as how far they're really willing to go. Are they willing to take that quest for power to the point of becoming king of the ash heap or queen of the ash heap? Is sometimes what you run into in fiction. Are they willing to take it so far that it costs them everything they love? And those are interesting aspects of the megalomaniacal villain, is that they're frequently tested that way in terms of how far are they really willing to carry it. Also, a good story about a character, who seeks power and is an end of itself, will also show that quest always exacts some kind of a price. An example, although I don't think you could fairly describe Thanos as a character who seeks power as an end of itself, I do think what's interesting about Thanos is in the way that his character arc is carried out, he pays a pretty severe price for power. And it does a good job, the MCU and the storyline do a good job of demonstrating the price he pays for power. Yes, he obtains near absolute power, and he loses everything he loves to get it. Forget the physical damage he does to his own body from the snap. He loses. He has a daughter he really loves and genuinely loves in the form of Gamora, and he's forced to sacrifice her in his quest for power, and that is an interesting thing. Because one of the pitfalls, in my opinion, of some less sophisticated fiction is this idea that you can have power and it is a total blessing and not a curse as long as you don't misuse it. And I think that Thanos is one example, and I can think of some others, namely like Firestarter, or the X-Men, where there's a clear theme of power comes at a price. And I think those are examples of that, but there's also an unfortunate trope in fiction where many times, especially with kids fiction, it's turned the other way, where it's seen as power is just this great gift, and it just brings on adventure and fun and blah blah blah, and there's no attempt made to discuss the price that might come from that. And this is going to probably be a future video of mine, is talking about that. But I think, to leave it off here, megalomaniacal villains, a good story about a megalomaniacal villain should show the villain paying a price for his or her quest for power. So if you find that disgusting and interesting, I would encourage you to like and subscribe to my channel. And if you are interested, check out my novels, Light Warriors and Chaos on Amazon. Thanks.